Hello, beautiful people. This is Venerable Tikwang Tree on Dharma Tree, and you're listening to Dharma on Demand. So today we will continue our journey with the Eightfold Path, and we are on the third path, which is right speech or samyak vak in Sanskrit. So right speech is based on right thinking, and speech is the way for our thinking to express itself aloud. And the Buddha has described or divided right speech into four components, which is abstaining from false speech, abstaining from slanderous speech, abstaining from harsh speech, and abstaining from idle chatter, exaggeration, or embellishing. And right speech is based on right thinking. So speech is, of course, is the way for our thinking to express itself aloud. So sometimes there are blocks of suffering in us. They may manifest as speech or as action sometimes without going through the medium of thought, right? We've all been in a situation where we have said or did something without thinking, right? So our suffering has built up and it can no longer be repressed, right? Especially when we have not been practicing right mindfulness. So expressing our suffering can harm us and other people if we don't practice right mindfulness diligently. Then we can say or write something that we did not want to say or did not want to know, because we just don't know where those words came from, right? We were unmindful of them. So, to water seeds of peace in ourselves, we have to practice right mindfulness while walking, when we're sitting, when we're standing, and so forth. So, with right mindfulness, we can see clearly all of our thoughts and feelings and know whether this or that thought is harming or helping us and others. So, when our thoughts leave our mind in the form of speech, if right mindfulness continues to accompany them, we know that we are saying whatever it is that's useful, or it may be creating problems. So, if we practice deep listening, because that is at the foundation of right speech. If we can't listen mindfully, then we can't practice right speech. So, no matter what we say, it will not be mindful because we'll be speaking only our own ideas and not in response to the other person. So, it's really important to practice compassionate listening because it brings about a healing for ourselves and others. But when someone listens to us in this way, we feel some relief almost immediately. So when communication is cut off, then we will all suffer. When no one is listening to us or understands us, we become like a bomb that's just ready to explode. So sometimes deep listening for only 10 minutes or a few minutes can really transform us and bring us a smile back to our lips, back to our faces. So sometimes we speak in an unskillful way, and this creates internal knots in others, right? We then say, I was just telling the truth, right? It may be the truth, but if our way of speaking causes unnecessary suffering, it is not right speech, right? So the truth must be presented in ways that others can accept. Words that damage or destroy are not right speech. So before we speak, understand the person you're speaking to. Consider each word carefully before you say anything, so that way your speech is right in both form and content. And so the first component of right speech is abstaining from false speech. And I will, for each of the components, I'm going to recite the quote that came from the discourses of from what the Buddha taught his disciples. So for false speech, the Buddha says, herein, someone avoids false speech and abstains from it. He speaks the truth, is devoted to truth, reliable, worthy of confidence, not a deceiver of people, being at a meeting or amongst people, or in the midst of his relatives, or in a society, or in the king's court, and called upon and asked to witness to tell what he knows, he answers, if he knows nothing, I know nothing. And if he knows, he answers, I know. If he has seen nothing, he answers, I have seen nothing. And if he has seen, he answers, I have seen. Thus he never knowingly speaks a lie. either for the sake of his own advantage or for the sake of others' advantage, or for the sake of my own advantage whatsoever. So this statement of the Buddha discloses both the negative and the positive sides of the precept. So the negative side is, of course, abstaining from lying, and the positive side is speaking the truth. So the determinative factor behind the transgression is the intention to deceive. If one speaks something false, believing it to be true, then there's no breach of the precepts, as the intent to deceive is absent, right? We don't know that we are intentionally deceiving. Though deceptive intention is common to all cases of false speech, lies can appear in different guises, right? Depending on the motivational root or the motivating root of it, whether greed, hatred, or delusion. So if greed is the chief motive, results in the lie aimed at gaining some personal advantage for oneself or for those close to oneself, right? Material wealth, position, respect, admiration, whatever it may be. With hatred as the motive, false speech takes the form of the malicious lie, the lie intended to hurt or damage others. And when delusion is the principal motive, the result is less harmful type of falsehood. The irrational lie, the compulsive lie, the interesting exaggeration, lying for the sake of a joke, for instance. So the Buddha's stricter against lying rests upon several reasons. For one thing, lying is disruptive to social cohesion, right? People can live together in society only in an atmosphere of mutual trust. Whether they have reason to believe that others will speak the truth, by destroying the ground of trust and inducing mass suspicion, widespread lying becomes the harbinger of signaling the fall from society, right, from social solidarity to chaos. But lying has other consequences, of course, that are deeply personal in nature, right? That is at least equally disastrous. So by their very nature, lies tend to multiply, right? Lying once and finding our word suspect, we feel compelled to lie again to defend our credibility, to point or to paint a consistent picture of the events, right? So the process repeats itself, and the lies stretch and multiply and connect until they lock us in a cage of falsehood from then it becomes just difficult to escape. So the lie is a miniature paradigm for the whole process of subjective illusion, right? So in each case, the self-assured creator, right, is sucked in by his own deceptions, eventually winds up being your own victim. But wisdom consists in the realization of truth. And truth is not just a verbal proposition, but the nature of things as they are. So to realize the truth, our whole being has to be brought into accord with actuality, right? With things as they are, which requires that in communications with others, we respect things as they are by speaking the truth. The second component is abstaining from slanderous speech. And the quote here is, he avoids slanderous speech and abstains from it. What he has heard here, he does not repeat there, so as to cause dissension there, and what he has heard there, he does not repeat here, so as to cause dissension here. Thus, he unites those that are divided, and those that are united he encourages. Concord gladdens him, he delights and rejoices in concord, and it is concord that he speaks by his words. So slander speech here is speech that is intended to create enmity and division, to alienate one person or a group from another. The motive behind such speech is generally aversion, resentment of a rival's success or virtues, for instance, the intention to tear down others by verbal defamation. Other motives may enter the picture as well, right? The cruel intention of causing hurt to others, the evil desire to win affection for oneself, the perverse delight in seeing friends divided, etc. The list goes on. But slanderous speech is one of the most serious moral transgressions, because the root of hate makes the unwholesome karma already heavy enough. But since the action usually occurs after deliberation, the negative force becomes even stronger because premeditation adds to its gravity, right? So when the slanderous statement is false, the two wrongs of falsehood and slander combine to produce an extremely powerful, unwholesome karma. So the opposite of slander, as the Buddha indicates, is speech that promotes friendship and harmony. And such speech originates from a mind of loving kindness, compassion, and sympathy. It wins the trust and affection of others who feel that they can confide in one without fear that their disclosures will be used against them later on. The third component is abstaining from harsh speech, and the Buddha says he avoids harsh language and abstains from it. He speaks such words as are gentle, soothing to the ear, loving. Such words go to the heart and are courteous, friendly, and agreeable to many. So harsh speech here is speech that's uttered in anger, intended to cause the hearer pain or suffering. Such speech can assume different forms, right? It can become abusive speech, right, like scolding, reviling, or reproving another angrily with bitter words. It can be by insult, right, hurting another by ascribing to him some offensive quality which distracts from his dignity. It can be sarcasm, even speaking to someone in a way which seemingly eludes him, but with such a tone or twist of phrasing that the ironic intent becomes clear and causes pain to that person, right? So the main root of harsh speech is aversion. It's assuming the form of anger. So since the defilement in this case tends to work impulsively without any deliberation, the transgression is less serious than slander, and the karmic consequence generally less severe. But still, harsh speech is still an unwholesome action with disagreeable results for oneself and for others. So both now and in the future, so it has to be restrained. Excuse me. So the ideal antidote is patience, learning to tolerate blame and criticism from others, to sympathize with their shortcomings, to respect differences in viewpoint, and to endure abuse without feeling compelled to retaliate. The last and fourth component is abstaining from idle chatter. And the Buddha says, he avoids idle chatter and abstains from it. He speaks at the right time in accordance with facts, speaks what is useful, speaks of the Dharma, and the discipline. His speech is like a treasure uttered at the right moment, accompanied by reason, moderate and full of sense. So idle chatter here is the pointless talk. It's speech that lacks purpose or depth, right? Such speech communicates nothing of value, but only stirs up the defilements in one's own mind and in others. And the Buddha advises that idle talk should be curbed and speech restricted as much as possible to matters of genuine importance. In the case of a monk or nun, their words should be selective and concerned primarily with the Dharma. For laypersons, will have a more need for affectionate small talk, with friends and family, polite conversations with acquaintances, and talk in connection with their line of work, for example. But even then, they should be mindful not to let the conversation stray into pastures where the restless mind, always eager for something sweet or spicy to feed on, might find the chance to indulge in defiling tendencies, right? The traditional interpretation of abstaining from idle chatter refers only to avoiding engagement in such talk oneself, right? But today, this can also include developments in like social media, for example, right? Or email and texting. People are now constantly bombarded by new media and turns out a continuous stream of needless information and distracting entertainment, right? The net effects of which is to leave the mind passive, vacant, and sterile almost. So serious aspirants on the path to liberation have to be extremely discerning in what they allow themselves to be exposed to, right? They would greatly they would greatly serve their aspirations by including these sources of amusement and needless information in the category of idle chatter and making an effort to avoid them. So if you ever in the past heard my Dharma talks at the temple or anywhere else, you may have heard me always say that everything starts in the mind, right? So depending on how your mind is disciplined, right, you're either going to have wholesome or unwholesome thoughts. And then those wholesome or unwholesome thoughts can turn into wholesome or unwholesome speech. And from speech, it can turn into wholesome or unwholesome actions. So you have many opportunities from thought, speech, and action to observe what's going on in your mind and make the conscious, wholesome effort or decision whether or not to think, say, or do what is going on in your mind, right? Because if you are unpracticed or unmindful, if you're thinking something unwholesomely, right, that's your opportunity to recognize and be aware of it. And you have the opportunity right then and there to stop that unwholesome thinking, right? So it doesn't turn into something else. But if at that point you're unable to stop yourself or unable to catch the unmindful thought, it may turn into speech, right? Unmindful speech or hurtful speech or slanderous speech or harsh speech, right? Any of the speeches that we just went over. And so at that point, that's another opportunity to stop yourself from going further than that, right? And if you're unable to stop yourself from going further, then that speech, unwholesome speech, turns into unwholesome action. Now, not only have you thought unwholesomely and said something that was unwholesome, now you're doing something unwholesome. And so if we are practicing diligently and really working on our mindfulness and our awareness to what goes on within ourselves and outside of ourselves, we have many opportunities to stop ourselves from doing something that's unwholesome, right? Because it all starts from the mind. And so the thinking process is your first step to catch yourself. If you're unable to catch yourself there, then you're able to catch yourself at the speaking part. If you're unable to catch yourself there, then you can stop yourself at the action part, right? You may have already done something unwholesomely in the action piece, but if you're able to be aware and mindful there, then you can stop yourself from doing even more damage potentially, right? And so this is why the mindfulness practice and practicing meditation, observing our mind and seeing how our mind works and where our mind goes during certain situations or circumstances really helps us be consciously aware of how things are working up in there, right? And so if we continuously practice awareness and mindfulness, then we become masters of our mind, right? Because right now we are definitely not masters of our mind. Because if you were truly master of your mind, then you would be able to literally control you'd be able to control your mind, right? You could be able to control you'd be able to stop thinking on command, right? You can literally just say, I'm gonna stop thinking right now. And nothing would ever come up in your mind. But unfortunately, we can't do that, right? We may be able to stop our thinking maybe for a few seconds, maybe for a minute or two, but eventually the thinking and the distractions and everything else arises will come back, right? If you're able to control your mind, then you'll be able to control everything that you think, say, and do. But again, unfortunately, that's not the case. And so because of that, if we were to truly practice and become diligent on our practice and in our path, and in our practice, then eventually we will truly be able to become masters of our mind, where we will be able to master every thought, speech, and action that we do. And of course, that's not easy. It's not necessarily difficult either, but it is something that we have to constantly work on, constantly be practicing, constantly putting effort into doing those things. So this is why the practice of the Eightfold Path is the foundation of Buddhism. It's the foundation of our practice. Everything stems from the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path. And if we are able to master these practices and master these teachings, then we will become enlightened, at least more easily than others. But I'm going to stop there. And as usual, if you have any other questions, or if you have any questions, concerns, or emotional outbursts, feel free to submit a comment on the video or send me an email or message or whatever form of communication you prefer. But that is it, and thank you for joining me today. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.